All right, Tim Freitas here with another set of quick questions. Well, it's a quick question, but I've been seeing questions about this arise a lot recently, and that is about counter arguments. And the questions that I've seen are: should a child or should a student have a counter argument in his or her essay? Should a student put his or her counter argument first, last, or wherever it might go? And will my student not get the sophistication point if there is no counter argument? And I'm going to try to clarify all of that for you here today. Now, before I get into the answers to those questions, though, I just want to make something entirely clear, is that honestly, we cannot treat writing like a checklist, where it's like if you have all of these things, you can just do these things, right? You can write an excellent argument that is not a counter argument, that has no counter argument, and still get the sophistication point and get full credit on your AP exam. You can also write an argument that's all counter argument and still do a great job. Think about Letter from a Birmingham Jail by Martin Luther King Jr. Think about the Robert Louis Stevenson's Letter to Father Damien. That is really, or Letter about Father Damien. I mean, those are really good examples of arguments that are all counter argument, that are excellent arguments, that are sophisticated. And so please note here that we want to make sure that we teach our kids that they have to respond to things in the context of what's provided to them. And if the argument prompt is one that can offer an opportunity to engage with a counter argument, well, then good, we want to teach kids how to do that. But sometimes prompts just don't allow for that. I think about the prompt from 2012 where it says, argue your position on the relationship between certainty and doubt. I cannot for the life of me figure out what a counter argument for that would look like. If I've got a student who's arguing that the relationship is that they're inversely proportionate, so as one goes up, the other goes down, what's the counter argument that someone's going to bring into that? Some might argue that they're actually opposites. Well, if we talk about being inversely proportionate, that shows that they are indeed related, and therefore, even if they're opposites, they're related, and it just doesn't work out. So we're trying to force a square peg into a round hole, and that's never any good. So we need to teach kids, right? Here's what a counter argument looks like when the opportunity allows for one, but you don't necessarily have to have one to have a strong, sophisticated argument. Now, if your if your student can have, or if you are a student watching this and you can have a counter argument in your paper and it's not something that you have to absolutely force, here's a couple things that you want to think about in terms of placement of your counter argument. A couple things. Number one, if you want your argument to follow a style that has been around for thousands of years and has worked perfectly, and that would be the classical argument style, your counter argument would be placed right before your conclusion. So you would actually create your claim, you'd support your claim, you'd address a counter argument or a concession, and then you would go into your so what. That is a tried and true method, okay? However, because we are writing for diverse circumstances, there are more things that you might have to think about. So you might want to say to yourself, maybe my counter argument should actually be put at the beginning of my paper, and when would that happen? That would happen in particular when your audience is contentious towards what you're talking about. And the reason why is because you can either concede or put your counter argument up front, because that shows your audience right away that you've already thought from their perspective. And rather than them having go through your whole presentation and having them say, oh yeah, well what about, oh yeah, well what about, oh yeah, well what about, in their minds, and then you finally get there at the end, so they haven't been paying attention to anything before. If you can actually alleviate that tension from the get-go by saying, I know what you all might be thinking, this might be the case, I'm willing to concede this, but I'm also willing to prove this part wrong. In that case, right, you will have a much, much stronger case. So when it comes to a counter argument, do you absolutely need one? No. Can you still write really well without one? Yes. If you have one, where should you put it? It depends. It depends on the context. If you have a contentious audience, I would suggest you put it up at the front. If you have an agreeable audience, I'd say you put it at the end. Or the other thing that I forgot to mention is that it depends on how your thesis is set up. If your thesis starts with an although or a while or some sort of concession, if you start with the concession in your thesis, that should be the order of your paper. So follow your thesis. So if you start with a counter argument or concession, you should begin your paper with your counter argument or concession. If your thesis is nice and complex and you end with a kind of like, however, this also has to be understood, well then fine, then it will go near the end. So follow your thesis. Think about your audience. If they're contentious, it goes up front. If they're not contentious, it can go down at the end. You might have a paper that actually works better if you do all counter arguments. Like I said, check out Letter from a Birmingham Jail, or that other one that I referenced from Robert Louis Stevenson about the about Father Damien and whatnot. So anyway, I hope this is helpful for you. We have a bunch of other quick questions that you can access up here to help you get through those kind of quick things that you want to know about. And I'm going to ask that you press like and subscribe because that really helps us here at the Garden of English as we begin to go, as we continue to grow. And we appreciate your support, and we look forward to coming back with some more quick questions. I think the next one we'll talk about is, should we list rhetorical choices in our thesis statement? And we're going to bring on a good friend to help us with that one. So you all have a great one.